Hey guys, tonight we take a drowsy detour into one of the most self-absorbed corners of Greek mythology. Literally, you'll be drifting beside a glassy, unmoving lake where every ripple is a mood swing, and one tragically handsome guy can't stop making eye contact with himself. That's right, this is the story of Narcissus, and by the end of it, you may never trust your bathroom mirror again. You'll follow Narcissus as he confuses love for a puddle and manages to get kicked out of a support group designed specifically for him. Along the way, expect a few whispering nymphs, a little light heartbreak, and a bizarre flower-related identity crisis. You probably won't survive this in a modern group chat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this sleepy little journey travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the edge of a lake so calm, it feels like time itself has decided to take a nap. The surface is flawless, mirror-like, not metaphorically, but in a way that feels a little too perfect. Not a ripple, not a breeze. Even your breath hesitates, not wanting to disturb the mood. And there he is, Narcissus, reclining by the shore like a man who's been paid to model indifference. His robes are vaguely tousled, in that suspiciously deliberate way. His hair gleams, each curl placed by the gods themselves, or at least a very dedicated breeze. You can almost smell the self-satisfaction from here. It's a blend of myrrh and unspoken superiority. He doesn't see you, or, more accurately, he sees you, but dismisses you as not a reflection, and therefore irrelevant. This is a man who would have posted gym selfies with captions like just humbled to be existing while flexing hard enough to crack the sky. You shuffle a little closer, careful not to disturb the sacred stillness. The water is impossibly clear, not just see-through, it's emotionally transparent. You could probably cry into it and it would just cry back, but he's not looking at you. He's looking at himself, not with obvious admiration, not like a guy who thinks he's hot. No, this is deeper. He's gazing at his reflection like it's a stranger who just told him a devastating secret. The myth always says he fell in love with himself, but right now, it doesn't look like love. It looks like confusion, maybe even suspicion, like he's just noticed that his reflection blinked half a second late. You decide to sit, not because he asked you to, but because this lake feels like the kind of place where you sit or you disappear. Above you, a heron caws like it's judging everyone's choices. You're not sure if it's a bird or a reincarnated therapist. And still, Narcissus stares. Sometimes he tilts his head. Sometimes he smirks. Once, he raises a hand toward the water, then stops, as if worried he'll disturb the illusion. Historians still argue whether this hesitation was poetic tragedy or just garden-variety vanity with seasonal depression. You lean closer and whisper something non-threatening, like, hey. He doesn't respond, just sighs deeply, perhaps at the audacity of existence. Now, mainstream Greek sources say Narcissus was born to a river god and a nymph, which honestly explains a lot. Imagine your whole personality being half moisture and half echo. According to some legends, the seer Tiresias warned at his birth that he would live a long life, but only if he never knew himself, which sounds like a riddle and an HR violation rolled into one. Quirkier versions of the myth claim the lake you're sitting by wasn't always this still. Some say it was a lively river once, until it saw Narcissus and just froze. Out of either admiration or secondhand embarrassment, the shadows lengthen. The lake reflects the darkening sky in dramatic grayscale. Narcissus sighs again. You realize you haven't heard him speak once, not to you, not to himself. It's like he doesn't need to say anything. His whole presence radiates a quiet monologue about beauty, detachment, and a subtle hunger for applause. You start to wonder, does he even know it's him in the water? Or has the line blurred so much that he thinks he's finally found someone who gets him? Historians still argue whether this was a case of identity confusion, divine punishment, or just an ancient Greek commentary on the dangers of overexposure. Your leg cramps slightly from sitting too long, but you don't move. Something about this scene holds you still, not out of fear, but out of an odd kind of reverence. like watching a deer about to trip on its own reflection and fall into a metaphor. Behind you, the forest murmurs, leaves rustle in patterns that feel almost like speech. You imagine the trees whispering, "Here we go again," like this is a rerun they've seen for centuries. Eventually, Narcissus leans forward, just slightly, his nose a breath away from touching the surface. The moment is so fragile, you feel the world inhale. And then he pauses. Maybe he's afraid the illusion will break. Maybe he knows that touching it will mean the spell is over, and once you know yourself, really know yourself, it's hard to pretend you're not just a mirror held up to your own loneliness. Or maybe he's just admiring his cheekbones. You never know with these guys. You blink, and he's still at it, gazing, sighing, occasionally brushing a non-existent speck of dust off his robe like it's a red carpet moment. Narcissus hasn't moved in what feels like an hour, and yet somehow he's managed to make not moving feel like a performance. Then you hear it footsteps, hesitant, squishy ones, from the brush behind you. A small nymph emerges, clutching a bouquet of what looks like overly emotional wildflowers. Her eyes are wide, lips trembling, like someone about to confess a huge crush via interpretive dance. She sees Narcissus, her shoulders square. She steps forward only to be completely ignored. She clears her throat. Still nothing. She tries again, this time with a flutter of her eyelids that could qualify as a minor storm front, and Narcissus. Not even a flicker. The man is locked into his own loop. This is where you start to notice a pattern, because soon, she's not alone. Another figure steps out, a shepherd, nervously combing his hair with a twig. He mutters something about how beautiful Narcissus is, how he's never seen anyone so radiant, and how he wrote a ballad on the back of a cheese wrapper. No reaction. Next comes a nymph with braided hair and enough bangles to rattle Mount Olympus. She opens her mouth, makes it halfway through a sonnet about his eyes resembling sunlight filtered through crushed sapphires, and gets cut off when Narcissus moves slightly to adjust his own posture, not in response to her, just dramatically. One by one, they come. Mortals, demigods, a talking raven who might just be cursed, and even somehow a goat. A very confused goat that seems way too emotionally invested. All of them are drawn to him. All of them try to connect. And all of them get the same thing in return. Nothing. Just that steady, rapt focus on his own reflection. Historians still argue whether this mass obsession was because of some divine charm, or just an ancient form of social media thirst trap. Some say the gods made him too beautiful on purpose, a kind of prank on both him and everyone he encountered. Others claim his beauty was a test to see if anyone could resist the pull of an unreachable ideal. They couldn't. You watch as a poor flute player offers him a melody that echoes with longing. It's delicate, haunting, and completely lost on him. Narcissus just leans back, squinting at the lake like he's critiquing his own eyebrows. Mainstream mythmakers often gloss over just how ridiculous this got. In some ancient sources, there's mention of a procession of admirers that stretched half a day's walk. Poets scribbled their names in tree bark. A widow tried to name her newborn Narcissina, only for the child to inexplicably turn into a swan and fly away. Coincidence? Probably, but honestly, who's ruling that out? You shift in the grass, starting to feel like you've accidentally walked into a meet and greet with a celebrity who only takes selfies with himself. That's when you hear the softest sigh. You turn. It's the goat. The goat looks heartbroken. It's unclear how much the goat understands, but it definitely feels rejected. It slowly turns and walks away, hooves dragging like someone who's just realized their favorite barista didn't remember their name. The others start to leave too. Some linger, hoping for a glance, a flicker of acknowledgement, but they get nothing. And honestly, it's starting to feel personal. You glance at Narcissus again. There's something uncanny in his stillness. The way he treats his reflection not with delight, but with hunger, like he's trying to solve a riddle written in his own bone structure. And that's when it clicks. He doesn't just like what he sees, he needs it. He's found someone who won't interrupt him. Someone who doesn't have expectations. Someone who stares back with the same intensity, never judging, never leaving. You start to wonder what kind of loneliness that is. Not just being alone, but being with someone who mirrors you so completely. You forget other people even exist. Historians still debate whether Narcissus ever truly understood he was looking at himself or if the magic of the water turned his reflection into something else, a separate presence, an illusion too convincing to break. Behind you, the leaves rustle with a slight shift of wind. One of the nymphs, perhaps the bangle-wearing one, whispers something into the trees before vanishing. You catch only a few words. Even the gods can't reach someone who only sees himself. It lingers. You glance down at the lake again. The image is perfectly still. Narcissus hasn't moved. His gaze is locked, not in joy, but in quiet torment. You take a step back, not wanting to break whatever spell or curse this is. There is a kind of sacred tragedy here, too heavy to disrupt. Like watching a man hug a ghost he thinks is real. And the sad part is he looks so close to understanding. There's a flicker of something behind his eyes, a question he can't quite ask, or maybe a realization forming, slowly, like mist on the surface. But he never says a word. Not to the nymphs, not to the goat, not to you, just to the water. And the water never answers. The silence is beginning to fray around the edges when you hear it. A faint, hollow echo. You turn, expecting another wind shift, another sigh from the emotionally drained goat maybe. But no, this one sounds deliberate, familiar, off. Hello, the voice says. Hello. It repeats only a heartbeat later, thinner, and from a slightly different direction. You freeze. Welcome to Echo's entrance. She doesn't walk into a room, she reverberates into it. One moment, she's nowhere. The next, she's everywhere. Her voice comes first, skating down tree trunks and bouncing off rocks, too fast and too faint to pin down. She was once a nymph like the others, chatty, joyful, maybe a little gossipy, but then she made the classic mistake of trying to help Zeus by distracting Hera with endless small talk. Bad idea. Hera, goddess of revenge and passive-aggressive punishment, didn't scream or smite her. No, she cursed her. From that day forward, Echo could only repeat what others said. No original thoughts. No spontaneous jokes. No, hey, just checking in. Which, honestly, made her the worst possible person to text during a crisis. You can imagine the frustration. Someone says, "I love you," and all she can do is whisper it back, like a badly glitched voicemail. You say, "Where are you?" And she echoes, "Where are you?" And you're like, that's not helpful. Echo. But here she is now, peeking between the trees like someone half scared, half desperate. She sees Narcissus and instantly stops moving. Her whole body leans forward, as if pulled by something magnetic. It's not just that he's beautiful, it's that he looks like he might listen. That he might, finally, say something she could repeat and mean. She steps forward. Branches crunch. Narcissus doesn't look. She gets closer, her hands clasped tight, trying to suppress every nervous flutter in her chest. She wants to speak, but can't not, unless he speaks first. So she waits. You wait. A leaf falls. Narcissus exhales. Just breath. Nothing usable. Echo's shoulders sag slightly. But she's not giving up. Finally, he shifts, mutters something under his breath, barely audible. Echo perks up like a deer hearing keys jingle. He says, "Who's there?" Her eyes light up. She echoes, "Who's there?" He freezes, glances around. You can see the gears trying to turn in his head. He repeats, louder, "Come here." She breathes, trembles, and replies, "Come here." And now he's curious, not frightened, not even suspicious, just intrigued. Here is someone whose words match his perfectly, not challenging, not contradicting, just reflecting. Sound familiar? You can almost hear the myth clicking into place. Narcissus, who has always dismissed anyone who talks too much, finally finds someone who only says what he says. Echo, who has been trapped inside other people's words, finds someone who wants to be repeated. It should work, right? It doesn't, because as soon as she steps into full view smiling, hopeful, radiant in her soft nymph glow, he sees her body, her presence, her separate self, and pulls back. He frowns. She's not the reflection. She's real, which means she's not him. He turns away. Echo's expression doesn't fall immediately. It unravels slowly, like a curtain tugged by an invisible draft. You can see her replaying every word, every step, wondering if she messed it up somehow, said the wrong thing, which, hilariously, is literally impossible. But still, she tries one last time. He says, "Leave me alone." And she, trembling, heartbreaking, still echoes, "Leave me alone." There's a pause. Then she turns and disappears into the trees. Not like a person, but like a whisper leaving your ear. You could try to follow, but there wouldn't be anything solid to find. She's become the sound of footsteps when no one's there. The echo that trails your voice in caves and empty parking garages. Mainstream mythology says she faded into nothingness, her body vanishing until only her voice remained. But fringe historians have more poetic takes. One theory suggests Echo retreated into the rocks, choosing to become part of the land rather than face another rejection. Another claims she still wanders, stuck in a loop of failed love stories, cursed to repeat breakup lines she never got to say. Historians still argue whether this part of the myth was meant as a cautionary tale about communication or just a brutal metaphor for women silenced in their own narratives. You sit still for a while, letting the silence settle again. There's something sharp about this place now, like the air has decided to stop being gentle. And Narcissus, he doesn't even look upset. He just sighs, maybe a little annoyed. You want to shake him, tell him what just happened, that someone showed up for him and vanished into myth because he couldn't look past his own obsession. But you don't, because you're starting to realize something about this story. It doesn't end with a bang. It ends with a stare. With a man who thinks the world doesn't understand him because he refuses to see it, and a girl who could have loved him if only he'd said something worth repeating. You stay seated for a long while, watching the clearing return to stillness. Echo's voice lingers faintly in the air, like a sound you can't tell whether you actually heard or just imagined. The trees sway, but nothing speaks. Even the goat, bless its heart, has wandered off to process its heartbreak somewhere private, probably behind a bush with dignity. Narcissus hasn't moved. You wonder if he's even aware of what just happened. If some part of him felt the presence behind him, if some shadow of remorse crossed his beautiful, impenetrable face. But no. His gaze is still fixed on the water. The same gaze, not even a smidge of curiosity. The man has less emotional range than a clay pot. So you get up, quietly, and begin walking. You enter the forest thick with vines, shadows, and metaphors. This place has a weight to it. A density made of whispers and dried flower petals, trampled by the hearts Narcissus broke. And there are a lot of them. You come across them one by one. First, a faded wreath of olive branches, lying where someone once waited too long for a smile. Then a tree carved with a name, just one name, repeated over and over, desperate for permanence. A name that now feels pathetic and forgotten. Further in, there's a shrine of sorts, offerings arranged in a spiral of stones and wilted herbs. Someone left a flute here, snapped in two, probably in frustration or poetic flair. This is the forest of rejected feelings. No, really, that's what the locals call it. A place where unrequited lovers of Narcissus come to shed their feelings like autumn leaves. Beautiful, brittle, and mostly ignored. You pass a statue, not of him, but of someone else. A young man, hands outstretched, carved in marble mid-confession. The expression is almost comic, part longing, part exasperation, like someone who's just realized he texted, "I love you" to a read receipt. Beneath it, scratched into the base in clumsy Greek, "He looked through me." You keep walking. You start noticing more subtle signs. A piece of torn fabric, embroidered with tiny stars. A sandal strap hung on a branch like someone left in a rush. A pile of pebbles, each one etched with a tiny broken heart. Historians still argue whether this forest existed in myth or was just a poetic invention later tacked on by sad playwrights. But fringe scholars claim it's a psychic echo, an emotional landfill, where all the discarded affections of Narcissus's admirers manifested physically. A place that grew from grief and gorgeous bone structure. You step into a small clearing. The grass is flattened in circular patterns, like group therapy sessions were once held here, perhaps around a central rock. There's still a faint smell of herbal tea and cinnamon sticks soaked in moonlight. You sit on one of the stones. It's cool, comforting. A voice, soft as moss, says, "Did you love him too?" You glance over. A nymph. Her eyes are tired, but kind. She's been here a while. No, you reply. I'm just observing. She nods. Most of us started that way. You don't press. Instead, she points to a hollow in the ground, filled with leaves. That's where we scream, quietly, into the dirt. You raise an eyebrow. It helps, she adds, with the calm resignation of someone who once tried writing a 7-page love poem and got ghosted by silence. There's something beautifully human about it all. These nymphs and mortals banded together not in vengeance, but in quiet mourning. They don't want Narcissus to suffer. They just want their feelings to matter, to exist outside his mirror. You ask if anyone ever moved on. She shrugs. Some became rivers. Some took new names. One of us tried dating Apollo. Pause. That was a mistake. You sit together in the hush. The forest feels alive in a sleepy way, like it's cradling centuries of sighs. Mainstream mythology doesn't linger here long. They skip straight to the punishment. But this space, this forest, it's important. Because before there was justice, there was grief. Before transformation, there was hope. You run your fingers through the moss. It's soft, springy, a gentle contrast to the cold glassiness of that mirror lake. Here, things decay, but they also grow. There's renewal in rejection. Not for Narcissus, maybe, but for the people who walked away from him and kept walking. Historians still argue whether this myth is about the curse of beauty or the curse of detachment. But in this forest, one theory feels clearer. Maybe Narcissus's real crime wasn't vanity. Maybe it was his inability to acknowledge that other people existed outside his own reflection. And that, more than anything, is why he's alone. You leave the forest of crushed feelings with a head full of sighs and a toe stubbed on a poetic rock. The path is narrow now, veering uphill. You follow it, curious to find the beginning of all this. Not Narcissus's beauty, no. You've seen plenty of that. But the beginning of the problem. And there it is, a stone archway carved with barely legible Greek. Beneath it, a quiet courtyard unfolds. Cracked tiles, arranged like a riddle no one ever solved. At the center, a half-collapsed shrine, moss-covered, sun-washed, and completely over it. This is where it all began, where someone first looked at baby Narcissus and said, "Oh no." You step closer. Inside the shrine, a single inscription remains. He shall live long. If he never knows himself, that's it. That's the whole prophecy. Not exactly subtle, is it? This warning came from Tiresias, the go-to seer in Greek mythology. The guy had seen everything, literally. He was transformed into a woman for 7 years, struck blind for snitching on the gods' private lives, and then gifted with eternal insight as a parting apology. If anyone knew what kind of doom hung over a person's head like a decorative cloud, it was him. He met baby Narcissus gurgling, glowing, probably already trying to catch his own reflection in a spoon, and dropped this prophecy like a passive-aggressive fortune cookie. Live long. If he never knows himself. Now, historians still argue what that really meant. Some say know himself was a metaphor for self-awareness. Others believe it was a literal instruction. Never gaze upon his own face. A few even suggest Tiresias was just being extra cryptic because he hadn't had his morning honey cake yet. You wander around this courtyard, taking in the vibe. It's got that neglected oracle energy. Vines growing through altar stones. Offerings from centuries ago turned brittle and weird. One ancient plate has the word handsome scratched into it so aggressively it cracked in half. And here's the strange thing, this place feels quiet. Not like it's sleeping, but like it gave up being wise and just decided to let people figure things out the hard way. You sit on the edge of the fountain dry now, but still carved with water nymphs locked in various facial expressions. Joy, concern, outright judgment. The prophecy echoes in your head, and suddenly you wonder, what if someone had just told him? Like, plainly, "Hey Narcissus, quick heads up. If you fall in love with your reflection, you're gonna die. No pressure." But that's not how myths work, is it? They hinge on people not understanding the rules until it's too late, on prophecies being delivered with just enough ambiguity to cause lifelong therapy. You imagine baby Narcissus growing up loved, admired, trailed by compliments like flower petals. And all the while, no one really telling him who he is, just reflecting back what they wanted him to be. Because here's the irony. He never got to know himself in the human way, the "what do I love?" what do I fear? What snack do I hide under my bed kind of way? Instead, he was only ever shown the surface his beauty over and over until he mistook it for the whole story. Fringe theories propose an alternate take, that Narcissus wasn't cursed by the gods, but by the lack of genuine connection, that everyone wanted him, but no one ever bothered to ask who he was. Beneath the cheekbones, which is a deeply ancient Greek way of saying, maybe he just needed a friend. You glance around. The wind carries the faint scent of laurel and something slightly singed, like the last traces of a burnt offering. Maybe someone recently left a little warning here. A new admirer, hoping to break the cycle. Or maybe not. Maybe people don't come here anymore. Maybe they don't want to face the uncomfortable truth at the core of the Narcissus myth, that sometimes the thing we're most obsessed with isn't beauty, but the illusion of being understood. And when that illusion breaks, when we finally look at ourselves and see only loneliness staring back, we freeze, like a lake before the fall. As the shadows lengthen and the shrine begins to fade into twilight, you feel a strange compassion stir in your chest. For Narcissus, for the baby who was never told enough truths, for the boy who mistook reflection for love, for the man who, in chasing understanding, lost himself completely. You brush a leaf off the edge of the altar. It falls silently into the fountain basin and lands with a whisper. And then, from somewhere in the stones, you think you hear it, live long, if, but the rest is gone. Like so many warnings, swallowed by time, you walk back into the forest, a little quieter now. The prophecy still rings faintly in your thoughts, like the leftover hum of a bell long after it stops ringing. Ahead, a break in the trees reveals an open glade sun-dappled, suspiciously peaceful, and smack in the middle of it, a semicircle of mossy stones, low cushions, a wooden sign that says, in delicate looping script, "Welcome to Nymphs Anonymous, Sharing Circle. Every full moon. Snacks optional." You've just stumbled into a group therapy session. You pause at the edge. The glade is dotted with softly glowing lanterns, as if fireflies had unionized and taken up mood lighting. Several nymphs are already gathered. Some sit cross-legged, others lie flat, staring at the sky like it's about to apologize. A few are leaning on each other for comfort, though one looks like she might be here just for the snacks. No one notices you yet. The air smells like rosemary and unresolved emotion. A tall nymph stands and clears her throat. Her voice is soft but carries the tone of someone who's read at least 2 scrolls on self-worth. "Tonight," she says gently, "we welcome new voices. If you feel ready to share..." The circle holds you. There's a pause, then a voice pipes up hesitant, musical. "I'm Amara. I once brought Narcissus a wreath made of river pearls and violets. He said it was distracting from the water. I haven't made a gift since." The group hums softly, a sound halfway between sympathy and a meditation app. Next, another nymph. "I'm Dione. He asked my name. I said it. He never spoke to me again. Sometimes I wonder if he was even listening." The hum deepens. Then someone else. "He smiled at me once. I fainted. Woke up in a stream. Pretty sure the fish judged me." Laughter bubbles. It's tired, but real. The kind of laughter you hear at midnight during a sleepover where everyone's too exhausted to pretend anymore. You decide to sit on a stone, unnoticed, but welcome. This is healing. In a weird, wild way. Because they're not just talking about him. They're talking about them, their stories, their pain, their recovery. And it's not angry, it's not vengeful, it's just honest. The tall nymph, probably the facilitator, nods. You are not defined by who didn't see you. You are whole without being mirrored. You feel that one. Mainstream myth rarely gives these women much space. Their props, set dressing, wounded hearts, and a story about one very pretty man. But here, they're 3-dimensional. Wounded. Yes, but not broken. One of them, a sprightly thing with dragonfly earrings, shares her poem. It's called Reflection Fatigue. It includes the line, "I searched for myself in his pupils, but all I found was sky." The group snaps in approval. Even you snap a little. A fringe historian once theorized that this entire part of the myth was cut from later retellings because it made Narcissus look too small. That these women, when gathered, were more powerful than any spell because they chose not to be erased. You believe it. After a while, the session winds down. A basket of lavender scones is passed around. Someone produces a teapot. A sleepy owl hoots like it's been emotionally moved. You sit there, sipping something floral, feeling oddly grounded. Then a question is posed. What would you say to him if he could hear you? A hush. That old hush. And then, one by one, they answer. I'd ask him to look up. I'd tell him it wasn't about being perfect. I'd say, you missed something real, and it's too late. And then someone says, I'd thank him. Everyone turns. The speaker, an older nymph, eyes the color of old glass, smiles sadly, because chasing him made me realize I'd forgotten myself. And now I remember. The others nod slowly. Historians still argue whether this part of the Narcissus cycle was ever intended as catharsis, or if it emerged later as a kind of cultural patch, a way to redeem all the hearts shattered in service to a myth. But whether it's canonical or invented, it feels true. You stand, the scent of lavender following you as you leave the circle. In the distance, the lake glimmers, still as ever, but you don't go back just yet. You need a few more steps, a few more breaths, to remember that not all reflections show you truth. Some just trap you in the surface. Eventually, the glade fades behind you, and the lake draws closer once more. But this time, something's changed. It's quieter, not in the usual forest way, where silence means peace. This quiet feels taut, like someone whispered, don't move, and the whole world obeyed. Even the birds have stopped narrating. The air is thick, with the kind of stillness that only happens when a myth is about to crystallize. You know what's waiting for you, the pool, the moment, the thing the entire story has been tiptoeing toward like a cat around a ceramic shelf. You break through the last line of trees. There he is, Narcissus, alone at the water's edge, knees pressed into the moss like a monk mid-prayer. His face is so close to the surface now, you wonder how the water doesn't fog. His fingers hover, twitching slightly, uncertain, like he wants to touch, like he's been wanting to for hours. The lake is a perfect mirror, a silver coin frozen mid-flip. It holds his face, his posture, his hesitation, all without question. The reflection is immaculate, and he's trapped inside it. He doesn't see you. You don't expect him to. At this point, if a meteor landed nearby, he'd probably just blink and adjust his angle to catch better lighting. You take a few careful steps forward. Your feet make no sound. Not even the moss dares to rustle. Then it happens. Narcissus lifts a single hand and lowers it toward the surface. Just a fingertip, just a gentle brush, and the reflection breaks. A single ripple fans outward like a soft gasp across the skin of the world. His face warps, bends, disappears. The perfect symmetry gone in an instant. He flinches, pulls back, blinking rapidly, disoriented, as if he's just lost a person he loved. Or a spell was broken, or both. But the water settles again, and there he is, reassembled. Still perfect, still staring. It's hard to tell how much time passes. Hours, a minute. You lose count of his breathless repetitions. The touch, the ripple, the heartbreak. Again and again. He never quite learns, or maybe he does, but forgets each time the water smooths out and tells him he's whole again. This is the poolside incident. This is the moment most versions of the myth mention, but don't linger on. He falls in love with his own image. That's the line they all use, but you see it now. It's not love. It's obsession. It's fear. It's a desperate hunger to feel connection without risk, to be adored without having to respond, because his reflection never asks anything of him, never contradicts, never echoes back pain, or need, or questions, just admiration. You shift, and a twig cracks under your foot. Narcissus jerks upright. For one terrifying second, his eyes meet yours. It's like staring into a solar flare dipped in self-doubt. Then he looks back down, like you were never there. Like nothing was. He leans closer again, lips parted slightly. This time he whispers something. You can't hear the words, but the lake does, and the lake answers by doing nothing, which, in Narcissus's world, is everything. There's a strange cruelty to it, the way the water reflects but never reaches. It offers presence without substance. Attention without intimacy. Historians still debate whether this moment was punishment, madness, or divine design. Some argue the gods cursed him to fall in love with himself as vengeance for his arrogance. Others claim he was simply born broken, too perfect to relate, too human to survive it. Fringe scholars suggest the lake wasn't just a lake, but a portal, a sentient surface designed to show people exactly what they feared most. For Narcissus, that fear wasn't aging, or rejection, or even death. It was being truly seen, not admired. Seen. And so he never looked up, never met another's gaze, never asked who they were, because the moment he did, the illusion might crack and underneath that beautiful face might be someone he didn't recognize. Someone who was lonely, someone who was afraid. You sit beside a rock, not to interfere, just to witness, because that's what this story really needs. Not interpretation, not judgment, just someone who saw it all happen and remembered. A gust of wind brushes your cheek, the lake shivers, and for a fraction of a second you see it. In the reflection, not Narcissus, but yourself, alone. Watching someone who cannot love you back. You blink, and the reflection is gone. Only Narcissus remains, bent over the pool like a question mark that never gets answered. You back away, slow as molasses on a cold marble floor, because now the story is moving into dangerous territory, the kind where gods start paying attention again. And when the gods start paying attention in Greek mythology, it's rarely for a hug. The air shifts, it smells like thunder, like pomegranates. Left too long in the sun, like cosmic bureaucracy getting out of bed for the first time in a century. You turn your head and realize you're not alone. Up on a rocky overlook above the glade, a group has gathered. Spectral figures in robes that shimmer like storm clouds over a wine-dark sea. Some lounge, some hover, some are obviously just here for the drama. Mount Olympus has officially sent the complaint department. At the center of the group stands Nemesis, goddess of divine retribution. The kind of entity who alphabetizes grudges and takes personal offense when balance isn't respected. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. She just watches Narcissus, arms folded, jaw locked in the kind of frown usually reserved for someone who refuses to use coasters. Around her, the other gods whisper among themselves. Aphrodite raises a skeptical eyebrow. He's not even that cute. Apollo tilts his head. He might be. From that angle, Hermes offers, do we have to smite him, or can we just unfollow? Athena, ever the scholar, sighs. This could have been prevented with a basic philosophy education and a handheld mirror. Historians still argue whether the gods were ever truly involved in Narcissus's story, or whether mortals just invented divine consequences to make the ending more poetic. But here they are, bored, vengeful, and possibly hangry. Nemesis steps forward. Her eyes fix on the scene below. Narcissus, still whispering to his reflection, still thinking the world has nothing more to offer than his own face. And finally, she moves. No thunderclap, no lightning bolt, just a flick of her wrist, a ripple in the air. And that's it. The spell is sealed. From this moment forward, Narcissus is doomed. Not because he's in love with himself, but because he can no longer see anything else. No voices will reach him. No love will save him. No truth will pull him out of that mirrored trap. He has become his own echo chamber, and the door is locked from the inside. Fringe theories suggest that Nemesis wasn't punishing his vanity, but his cruelty. That ignoring all those who loved him wasn't about beauty, but about power. That she didn't curse him to fall in love with himself, but to finally feel what everyone else felt around him. Unseen, unheard, unreachable. And now, he does. Every time he touches the water, he reaches for something that only ever pretends to reach back. You look up, the gods are already dispersing. Some roll their eyes. Some look satisfied. One or two look quietly devastated, as if they've seen this too many times already. Before she leaves, Nemesis glances at you. It's the briefest moment, but in her gaze, there's no anger, only inevitability. She vanishes, and you're alone again. Except, of course, for Narcissus, still kneeling, still reaching, still asking the lake for something it will never give him. You walk closer just enough to hear the words he's been repeating. Not "I love you," not "come back," just one word, over and over, "stay," and every time, the lake gives him the exact same face and says nothing. You settle beside a patch of reeds, just far enough from the edge that your reflection doesn't join the party. The wind moves gently across the surface, but the lake barely reacts anymore. It's like it's learned not to interrupt. Across the water, something shifts, not in the air, not in the earth. In the silence, There's a kind of mourning settling in. Not loud, not operatic. Just that low, slow ache that sneaks in when no one's watching, and someone is watching. Echo, she's returned, but not in the way she was before. Not as a nymph with soft footsteps and hopeful eyes. No, she's almost gone now, half dissolved into the cliffs, the rocks, the very walls of this glade. You can't see her, but you hear her, not in words, but in responses. When a branch snaps, the sound repeats faintly. When a bird calls once, the same note echoes back, softer, like an afterthought. And then Narcissus speaks again, a whisper this time, "Stay," and you hear it. Stay. It's her voice, or what's left of it. It doesn't make him turn, doesn't make him blink. He thinks it's the lake echoing him. He thinks everything he hears is about him. He's not wrong, but he's not right either. This is Echo's final performance. The tragic closing act no one claps for. She doesn't scream. She doesn't rage. She doesn't confront him. She just repeats, because that's all she can do. And you sit there, chilled by the quiet horror of it all. She repeats, "Stay." And you hear a different meaning in her voice. Not a plea, not desire, but grief. Stay. Stuck. Stay. Alone. Stay with yourself. It's a strange duet, one-sided, hollow, beautifully awful. You remember what one of the nymphs said back in the circle? Even the gods can't reach someone who only sees himself. Echo tried, over and over. She wanted to be heard, to be chosen. And now, she's the last voice he'll ever get, because no one else is coming. They've all moved on or turned to trees, or fish, or moonlight. Classic, post-heartbreak, career shifts. Mainstream tellings often forget this part. They focus on Narcissus, his beauty, his demise, his poetic downfall. But Echo's end is stranger, sadder, and, in a way, more eternal. She becomes the sound that lingers, the faint repetition when no one is around, a voice with no origin, no identity, just fragments. Fringe historians bless their sleepless, possibly over-caffeinated souls, once theorized that Echo's curse was more complex than Hera intended, that over time, the magic warped. And Echo didn't just lose her voice. She lost herself, piece by piece. Every word she repeated replaced one of her own, until she wasn't Echo the nymph, just Echo, the phenomenon. It hits you, sitting there, how deeply cruel that is. Because in trying to connect with Narcissus, in trying to reflect him, she became the very thing he worshipped most, a reflection. And even then, he didn't recognize her. There's a rustling behind you. You don't turn. It's probably not her, but maybe it is. Maybe she's still trying, still lingering, still hoping that someone, not him, maybe not even you, but someone will answer her voice. Not just repeat it. You whisper, softly, "I hear you." The wind pauses, the reeds hush, and then faintly you hear you. You close your eyes, not because you're sad, but because this moment deserves to live in the dark, in that soft space where lonely voices drift and finally touch. You lie back in the grass, eyes to the canopy above. The sky has shifted deeper now, a velvety blue tinged with that hour between not quite day and not yet night. That liminal space where stories like this hang suspended, unfinished. Narcissus hasn't moved. His face hovers just above the water, close enough that a sneeze might drown him. And you wonder if he even remembers how long he's been here. Days, weeks. Does time matter to someone who only measures change in ripples? And that's when it happens. He leans in too far. The ground beneath him soft, damp. Betrayed by gravity gives slightly, just enough, and Narcissus tumbles forward, arms flailing in a sudden betrayal of grace. There's a splash, small, but final. The lake erupts in rings of silver and sound. For a moment, the forest startles, leaves shiver. A bird cries out. You bolt upright. Then silence. You rush forward, heart oddly tight, expecting what? A rescue, a struggle, a final gasp. But the surface calms again too quickly. No thrashing, no bubbles, just stillness. Too still. And then you see it. Not Narcissus. A flower. Where his body had been, there now grows a single bloom. pale, fragrant, bent gently toward the water, as if still admiring itself, or mourning. The narcissus flower. It's beautiful. Of course, with delicate white petals and a golden center, like a miniature crown. But something about it feels tragic. Not in the pretty painting way, in the this is the only way it could end way, and you feel it settle into place. The myth has completed its loop. Mainstream tellings say the gods, moved by pity or irony, turned him into the flower that bears his name, an eternal symbol of beauty, fragility, and just a touch of absurd hubris. Fringe historians go further. They claim the flower wasn't a gift, but a prison. That Narcissus didn't die at all. That he was preserved, frozen in that moment of self-adoration forever. No longer a man, not quite a spirit, just a bloom that would return every spring, stare into puddles, and remember nothing but the shape of its own face. You sit beside it. It leans toward the water. You lean back. Neither of you speaks. Eventually, the forest exhales again. Life resumes. Distant insects hum. A squirrel with absolutely no respect for grief scampers by, chewing something crunchy. But here, by the edge of the lake, everything remains still. And you wonder, was this what he wanted? To be admired forever. To be untouched, unchanging. Because he got it. And it cost him everything. You pluck a blade of grass, turn it in your fingers. The flower doesn't move, just nods slightly, as if the wind itself is sighing. There's something poetic here. Yes, but also deeply uncomfortable, because when you really think about it, he never asked for any of this. He was born beautiful, told so, constantly, never taught to look beyond it, never asked who he was, only what he looked like. He was warned vaguely, he was pursued relentlessly. And when he finally found something that gave him the attention he thought he needed, it broke him. Historians still debate whether Narcissus was a cautionary tale for vanity or for loneliness, whether his obsession was with beauty or with being seen. But sitting here beside this quiet, nodding flower, you start to suspect the truth is somewhere in between. He wasn't punished for loving himself. He was punished for mistaking reflection for relationship. And in a way, aren't we all guilty of that sometimes? Liking the version of ourselves we present, curating the image, avoiding the cracks, pretending the surface is the depth. You stand slowly, the flower doesn't react. You won't touch it, not because it's sacred, but because it's already too much to carry. You whisper, not expecting an answer, goodbye. And from far off, from no direction and every direction at once, you hear echo, goodbye. You don't look back. Not because you're trying to be dramatic, but because you've learned that in myths like these, the backward glance is where people fall apart, or turn to salt, or accidentally marry their mother. You step into the trees again, and the forest swells with quiet. Not empty, just contemplative, as if even the birds are giving the moment a respectful silence. Maybe they've seen this before. Maybe they know Narcissus isn't the first, and won't be the last. You follow a meandering trail worn into the earth by centuries of wandering feet, the kind of path you only find if you aren't looking for it. The kind of path that leads, not to answers, but to fan fiction. Because guess what? The myth didn't end at the lake. Not really. Turns out, Narcissus's story lingered far beyond his fall, etched into marble, scribbled on scrolls, whispered at dinner parties by poets who wore too much cologne and believed in tragic beauty as a personality trait. You find yourself in a grove of statues, half-cracked busts of Narcissus in various stages of brooding, some serious, some smirking. One with an eyebrow raised so high it looks like he's silently judging your entire existence. They're not just tributes, they're interpretations. Each sculptor saw something different. Here's one where he holds a flower reaching, not admiring. Here's one where he's falling not into water, but into light. Here's one that's just his face. No body, like beauty divorced from responsibility. You touch one. The marble is cool, worn smooth by centuries of reverent fingers. Someone once loved this version of him enough to chisel it into permanence. And it hits you. We didn't just remember Narcissus, we rewrote him over and over, across generations, each version reflecting something we needed to see about ourselves. Mainstream mythologies gave him a simple arc. Look, love, drown, bloom. But the art left behind is messy, contradictory. In some, he's tragic. In others, aloof. Some paint him as a villain, others as a victim. There's a bust nearby with a plaque that reads, "To be known and not touched." And that lingers. You continue on. Eventually, you come to a courtyard. Cracked tiles, a dusty podium, scrolls scattered like overcooked spaghetti on the floor. This, apparently, is where the real fans gathered. There's graffiti on the wall. It says, "Narcissus did nothing wrong." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Except emotionally, damage every nymph in a 40-mile radius." And beside that, Team Echo. You laugh quietly. The kind of laugh that comes from recognizing your own reflection in someone else's overinvestment. Someone once hosted a symposium here, a full-on conference. Debate topics carved into stone. Was Narcissus self-absorbed or self-starved? Is a reflection a lover or a mirror? What would Plato say about the pool? Historians still argue whether these debates were taken seriously, or were just ancient academia doing its thing, turning myth into metaphor until everyone forgot someone might have actually cried at that lake. You sit on the stone floor, a half-burned scroll near your foot. The opening line reads, "In seeing himself, he saw nothing else." You think about all the stories you've heard how people reacted to Narcissus, the poems, the lectures, the statues, the angry nymph Reddit threads, probably papyrus-based, and you realize he became more myth than man. Because people couldn't let him be just one thing. They needed him to mean something. So he became a warning, a punchline, a muse, a projection. And isn't that ironic? That in trying to understand Narcissus, the world kept staring at its own reflection in him. He became a mirror again, but this time, not by choice. You lean back against the wall, surrounded by crumbling philosophy and melodramatic declarations of devotion. The light shifts through cracked stone, casting fractured shadows across the floor, and you realize maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that Narcissus drowned, but that we never let him climb out. We needed him to stay in that moment, forever beautiful, forever unreachable, forever reflecting something we wanted, and never questioning if he wanted anything at all. The breeze picks up. A scroll flutters open beside you. Its last line reads, "The flower bends not for worship, but for rest." And you let that sit. Let it settle in the soft place behind your ribs. Then, quietly, you stand. You leave the courtyard of marble and memory behind, not because you're done thinking, but because even myths deserve to be left alone. Eventually, the path curves again, narrower now, more overgrown. As you push aside a cluster of low-hanging branches, you step into another clearing, smaller this time, more intimate. It smells faintly of time and something antiseptic. Someone's tried to clean this place. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary grove, but the setup gives it away. A low stone bench, a rug, a stack of clay tablets positioned in a semicircle like very underfunded therapy chairs. Welcome to the intervention, or rather the one that didn't work. They called it group therapy for the romantically overlooked, or so says the barely legible inscription carved into a nearby tree, a nymph's handwriting. You suspect all loops and passive-aggressive flourishes. Here's where it happened, where they tried, really tried, to heal together. You picture it. Nymphs, satyrs, demi-mortals, and at least one scorned shepherd holding herbal tea and nursing deep emotional bruises. They came here to process it all, to cry it out, to speak their truth and maybe, just maybe, move on from him. And for a while, it worked. They took turns. I gave him 3 months of my best poetry, says one, probably clenching a mug that says words hurt. 2. Another. He smiled at me and then immediately looked through me, like I was smoke. They processed, they breathed. They let their pain stretch its legs and walk around a little, until he showed up. Yes, Narcissus showed up to the group therapy session designed for people he emotionally destroyed. The details are sketchy. Some say he wandered in by accident, chasing the echo of his own name. Others claim he'd heard rumors of a gathering and assumed it was a tribute. Either way, he sat down, didn't greet anyone, didn't apologize, just looked around the circle, nodded once, and said, "I think I've been deeply misunderstood." And the silence that followed, biblical. One of the nymphs reportedly dropped her cup. Another muttered, "Oh, no he didn't," in ancient Aeolian. But the facilitator, probably the same tall, wise nymph from before, took a deep breath and said, "Thank you for sharing." Narcissus, Would you like to say more? And oh, did he ever? He launched into a monologue about how hard it is to be admired all the time, how isolating it is when no one understands the burden of being beautiful, how exhausting it is to be everyone's fantasy but never anyone's equal. To his credit, he wasn't wrong, but he also missed the point entirely, because every person in that circle had experienced being invisible to him, and here he was complaining about being too visible. He finished his speech with something like, "I'm just tired of being looked at," and one of the satyrs allegedly choked on a grape. The facilitator tried to bring it back. "Thank you, Narcissus. Now, let's open the floor to how that made people feel." Silence. Until Dione, yes. Her again stood up and calmly said, "It made me feel like setting your robe on fire," which is fair. Historians still argue whether the group disbanded that day or just went underground. Some say it evolved into a ritual retreat for the heart-weary. Others insist it became a cautionary case study for the gods. Never invite the subject of collective trauma to the trauma circle. You scan the clearing again. There's still a faint imprint in the moss where someone once sat cross-legged, clutching a lyre and silently weeping. A rusted tea kettle leans against a stump. The scent of dried chamomile hangs in the air like a patient ghost, and in the center, a small stone marker, inscribed, "He came, he spoke, he learned nothing." You sit beside it, careful not to disturb the solemn hilarity of that moment, because you get it now. You've seen both sides. Narcissus wasn't evil. He wasn't cruel on purpose, but he also never made room for anyone else's reflection. His entire life was a solo act in front of a mirror that wouldn't crack. And when he did try to understand, he made it about him again. You lie back in the grass, arms crossed behind your head. The trees above sway like they're nodding, and somewhere not far, but not close, Echo repeats that last phrase. He learned nothing. You wake if you ever actually fell asleep to the sound of bees, not aggressive bees. Not you left your soda open in July bees, just a low, soft buzzing, peaceful, like someone humming the song with no melody. They're swarming the flower. The Narcissus, still bent over the pool, still frozen in that eternal pose of admiration or regret or maybe just dramatic neck tension. The bees treat it like any other bloom, just another spot to land, to gather, to move on. And it feels strange, because no matter how legendary this flower is, no matter how many poets wrote sonnets about it, it still gets pollinated like everyone else. Nature, it turns out, is unimpressed by myth. You step closer. Quietly, the flower doesn't move. Of course it doesn't, but something feels different. It's wilting, slightly, just a gentle curve inward. A petal gone translucent at the edge, the kind of fade that even a god might miss unless they were looking closely. You sit beside it. You wonder if flowers dream, if Narcissus, in his current form, feels anything. Does he remember the lake? The longing? Does he hear Echo, still repeating his name every time a hiker yells into a canyon? Or is he finally at peace? Historians still argue whether the transformation was a punishment, a mercy, or a cosmic joke. Some say Nemesis turned him into the flower to immortalize his suffering. Others believe it was Aphrodite's idea, a way to let him keep his beauty without hurting anyone else. A few fringe theorists even claim it was Echo's doing, that she whispered to the gods and said, "Make him stay, make him still." But here's the part no one agrees on. Did he want it? Because we always assume the transformation was involuntary, that he drowned, that the gods intervened, that fate clicked into place like mythological Tupperware. But what if just maybe he chose it? What if, in that final moment before the water closed over him, he thought, "This is the only version of me that will never change. Not grow old, not be misunderstood, not lose the thing he loved because he'd become it." And so, he let go. You look at the flower again. The bees have moved on. The breeze lifts one loose petal and drops it onto the water's surface. It floats there, dizzy, rootless, and briefly stunning, then sinks. You think about all the things Narcissus never said, all the apologies he didn't know how to form, the thanks he never offered, the love he never returned. A whole life spent mistaking attention for connection. You want to forgive him, but you don't know if that's your job. You lean back against the earth and stare up at the sky. Clouds drift like old regrets, harmless now, too high to matter. And suddenly, you're not thinking about Narcissus anymore. You're thinking about yourself. about the ways you sometimes stare into your own reflection, not just in mirrors, but in people, in screens. In old conversations you replay like lullabies with different endings, about the moments when being seen felt safer than being known, about the times you flinched when someone really tried to reach you. Because that's the truth of this myth, isn't it? It's not just about a guy who fell in love with his face, it's about how easy it is to fall into ourselves, to become so wrapped in the image we want to maintain. We forget to turn our heads to look up, to notice who's there, who's hurting, who's trying to love us despite the fog. A bee returns briefly, then leaves again. You smile, not at the flower, but at what it became and what it warned you not to become. You leave the flower behind, not as an act of forgetting, but as an act of finally knowing when to walk away. The forest exhales around you, its shadows softening as twilight stretches overhead. It's the kind of dusk that ancient poets always overdescribed, amber melting into violet, air thick with sleepy magic, etc. But in this moment, it feels earned. You follow a new path now, less obvious, not trodden into the earth by centuries of grief. This one curls upward, into higher ground. You're not alone. No, not haunted. Just accompanied by every whispered fragment of this myth you've gathered so far. Echo's fading voice, Narcissus's final word, the humming grief of the nymphs, even the gods, with their eye rolls and divine indifference. They walk with you now, not behind, but within. The path leads you to a small outcrop of stone, nothing fancy, no inscriptions, no drama, just a ledge with a view. Below, the lake, the flower, the trees, the ghosts. Above, stars, quiet, room to breathe. You sit, and that's when you start wondering, what would happen if we told this story differently? If we rewrote the myth not to erase the tragedy, but to open a window inside it? Like, what if Narcissus had looked up? What if Echo had found a way to speak her own words? What if the nymphs didn't just grieve, but healed? What if the gods didn't punish, but guided? Historians still argue whether myths evolve or just repeat themselves in prettier fonts. But maybe repetition isn't the problem. Maybe the problem is we keep telling stories in circles and expecting them to become lines. So let's try a different shape. Let's imagine Narcissus not as an icon of vanity, but as a boy who got stuck in a loop and didn't know how to ask for help. Let's imagine Echo not just as a victim, but as a girl who deserved a name no one else had already spoken. Let's imagine the lake not as a trap but as a mirror offered too soon. Because what if Narcissus had been older, wiser? What if someone had sat with him long enough to say, that reflection isn't love, it's loneliness with good lighting? Would he have believed it? Would we? You look at your own hands, your own shape, shadowed now in moonlight. You are not the flower. You are not the lake. You are not the echo. But you are a person who's heard this story, who has carried it, who might carry it differently now. And maybe that's enough. Below, the flower catches the breeze, bowing slightly, not in reverence, not in mourning, just bending. As flowers do, you don't need to see your reflection to understand yourself better. You just need stillness and a little patience. And sometimes a myth that hits too close. You lie back on the stone. The sky tilts above you, bigger than anything this story could hold. And in the quiet, you hear one last whisper, maybe from the wind, maybe from echo, maybe from your own tired brain. It doesn't have to end the same way this time. And you believe her? You stay on the stone until the stars are fully awake sharp. Quiet things scattered across the sky like they too are watching, waiting for the story to truly end. But myths don't really end, do they? They just loop in softer circles. They fade, return, shift shape, get misquoted, tattooed, turned into metaphors for things people never originally meant. And Narcissus, poor, beautiful, broken. Narcissus is perhaps the most looped of them all. You sit up slowly, body stiff from stillness. Somewhere down in the trees, a nightbird calls. A reply comes seconds later. Echo. Maybe, or maybe the forest has simply learned the rhythm of things and repeats what it likes. You begin to walk again. The path doesn't take you anywhere new. That's not its job. It brings you back through the ruins of the symposium, past the cracked busts and smirking statues, through the therapy grove, past the lake now darker, now stiller, its flower closed for the night like a secret you're not supposed to ask about. You don't stop, not this time. You've seen what you needed to see, And what you've seen is not just Narcissus, it's the way everyone looked at him, the way they framed him, the way they projected love and obsession and loneliness onto a person who never asked for the spotlight, only to be understood and then punished for not understanding himself fast enough. You pass a vine-choked tree with a heart carved into it, initials barely legible. Someone long gone thought, love would last longer if etched into bark. And maybe it did, just not the way they planned. You smile sad, but real, because now you understand something no statue ever captured. Narcissus didn't fall because he was vain. He fell because he was hungry. Hungry for connection, for clarity, for a kind of love that didn't require him to perform. And he found something that looked like love, and it stared back, and it stayed silent. You exit the forest. A soft breeze follows, cool against your skin. The stars above don't blink. They're old. They've seen thousands of Narcissuses. They'll see thousands more. People who reach for their own image, hoping to find someone else inside it. But here's the gift of walking out of a myth. You get to choose what to take with you. Maybe you'll remember the warnings. Maybe you'll remember the flower. Or maybe you'll remember that sometimes the greatest kindness isn't admiration. It's listening, real listening, the kind that asks nothing in return. You glance back once, not to mourn, not to linger, just to honor the stillness, then forward again, because the myth is finished. But you aren't. And now, let the story settle. Let it drift down like ash from a quiet fire. Let it melt into the corners of your room, softening the edges of your thoughts. You are no longer in the forest, no longer beneath the weight of watching eyes. The lake has gone still. The flower has closed. Echo has faded. Her final words no longer chasing you. All that remains is breath. Yours, steady, easy, slow. Let it guide you into stillness. With each inhale, gather the scattered parts of yourself, the voices, the images, the lingering feelings left behind by a story too human to be entirely fictional. And with each exhale, release them. The ache of unreturned affection, the quiet panic of being misunderstood, the long pauses where connection should have been. Let them go. There is nothing more to chase tonight. No reflection left to examine. Just you, here, present. The stars outside may still shine, but they are far gone. Far away, you are closer to the earth now, closer to sleep, closer to the kind of peace that doesn't demand answers, only rest. So soften. Unclench your jaw. Let your hands relax. Let your eyes drift shut, not in retreat, but in quiet victory, because you've walked through a myth tonight and come back whole.